This is a Step Beyond the Fire podcast. My name is Cully. I'm a land manager and a wildlife biologist here in my home state of Florida. I invite you to join me on a journey as I seek to document the little-known stories told by those who use fire for the benefit of the land, also known as prescribed fire. So come on, let's head into the field and meet the people where the flame ends and new life begins. Welcome back, everybody, to the July 2024 episode of A Step Beyond the Fire podcast. Our guest of honor this month is John McCabe. John is the director of the Department of Resource Management in the Forest Preserve District of Cook County, Illinois. He's the current president of the Illinois Prescribed Fire Council as well. So he oversees over 90 staff, $25 million budget, and a really complex prescribed burn program. And he also does a lot of other things like serving as a lead instructor for the Chicago Wilderness Midwest Ecological Prescription Burn Crew member training program, where they have like 2,500 members have been through this program since '01. It's a very well-known program in that part of the country. And over his 30-plus year career, he's been a strong leader in fire. Not only that, his community and as a natural resource professional. How's that for an intro?
Sounds very good. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you being here. I'm glad we got a chance to connect.
Thanks for the invite.
So I found out about some of the work that you're doing, and I want to offer this up for the folks that are listening to the show, is that the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point has a great monthly program where they offer an educational series. And I found out about Cook County, Illinois, and the work you're doing there through this whole educational series. So I encourage you guys to check that out. Make sure you look up University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point Prescribed Fire Education. And you should be able to, that should be enough for you to find that information and get logged in for those programs that happen each month. And I thought what was most remarkable about all this is that Cook County is like the second most populated county in the whole country. There's like over 5 million people that are in this county. The only other county that's bigger than yours is Los Angeles County. And you're doing a lot of really interesting work there. So I'd like to, that kind of be the first thing we talk a little bit about. Tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing there, some of those major obstacles that you're having to overcome to get to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been a long road. There's no doubt about that. And the first thing that I want to let folks know is that this did not happen overnight, and it hasn't been happening forever. It's really been about the last 10 years that we've been able to take our program to the next level, but building it up since the early 90s. And overcoming a lot of those obstacles that you would expect trying to put fire on the ground in the second most populated county in the United States. So one was getting people to recognize that this needed to be done, right? That the value of it. So that was a key component, especially early on when prescribed fire, even somewhat nationally, may not have even been accepted or recognized on the federal level. And then, other larger scale prescribed fire. So convincing people in a very urban area that this was something that we needed to do versus, again, everything you heard in school, right, was fire is bad, put it out sort of scenario. So explaining these fire-dependent ecosystems will need this in order to be as healthy as they can be. The other component for us, not just the public, but is the administration that I work for and the elected officials that I work for and have to deal with day to day, getting them to understand this component. And so that was a really difficult process, as you could imagine. But we've gotten there, and not everybody's on board, to be clear. But the fact of the matter is that we got the majority on board now, and that's what's really helped make the difference. That education piece, being patient with it, thinking about different ways to communicate with people because people take things in differently. the other thing about our county is it's a very diverse county, and so being able to communicate with different communities and getting folks on board through all those different channels. So a lot of outreach, a lot of stuff at special events. That's a great way to reach people when they're coming to special events that your organization may be running or a partner of yours is running, and you could be there and take advantage of that captive audience. That was very important. The other really key component for us then was the staffing issue and being able to bring people on board that really want to do this work. Any of us that are in the fire field know when you're out on that fire line, you really got to want to be there. And that wasn't always the case with our organization because we weren't focused on this as, even though it was an important part of our mission, we ourselves didn't recognize it as that in the early 1990s, even into the early 2000s. It wasn't until the late 2000s that we really said, we have to make this a priority. And then we started hiring people that felt the same way about it. And, after being out on the fire line for, 8 to 10 hours that day, you want people that really want to be there to finish out the last couple of hours of that burn or your burn day. And then knowing you have to come back and do it tomorrow and maybe the next day and the next day, right? Because for us, that burn window is very narrow in the spring and the fall season. And so we have to take advantage of any days we can burn. So having staff that really wants to be there was another key component. Another very important piece, of course, is the funding and having that available. And early on, we were really stretched as far as being able to do things and have staff that was out there with the necessary equipment. So when I first started in the early 90s with the burn program, we were lucky to have 2 crews. I mean, mostly we had 1 crew going out. Now we're in a situation where I have anywhere from 10 to 14 fire crews out on a given burn day. And that has come from, again, the change in support, the funding piece, the acceptance of this as a legitimate management tool. So those are all key things. I'll take a break at that point here and catch my breath.
Yeah, that's really incredible that you're able to work through those challenges at the initial outset, because I'm sure being within the vicinity of Chicago specifically, very densely populated area nowadays anyway, and I'm sure there's kind of a wide range of people, their viewpoints on fire. But I do recall when I was thinking about Chicago the other day, I read, there's a great book called Memoirs of a Naturalist, and it's about Herbert Stoddard. I don't know if you had an opportunity to read it, but he did some of his early work around the areas of Chicago, and he described what the landscape looked like back in the days. I believe it was maybe in the 40s and 50s. He was there doing ecological surveys, and they were collecting museum specimens and doing some interesting work there. But he talked about fire being a part of that landscape there, and I just, not being familiar with the area, I thought it was particularly interesting within that book. So it sounds like, obviously you've mastered this art of coordinating and working with these different contractors, because and I got excited about that because I'm doing this myself right now. I'm trying to set up contracts and using that as a way to leverage support and maximize those the very few and far between good days that we get on the fire line. So being able to use tax dollars to work through and get more people involved. Can you talk about maybe 1 or 2 of your keys to success when it comes to hiring help and getting good people in the right places at the right time?
Yeah. And the contractor piece is critical to our program. I think anybody in a conservation field, at least I haven't met anybody that wouldn't agree with this statement, that we have more than enough work to do and that we will never have the necessary resources to do all the work that we have to do. And so that's where contractors come in for us, even with all the in-house staff I have, as you mentioned, 90 folks working in this department now, which is a big increase just from a few years ago where we were at 60 people. And contractors have, over these last 10 years, been a key part of us being able to get the level of work done. So that 10 to 14 crews, we're now at 6 in-house crews, and then the rest is made up by contractual folks coming out and burning on our property. I think the key for us there has been, while we're paying these people, we're still building relationships with them. They're working on our property year round. So it's not just a fire contract. That's the other key component to this is we call it the habitat enhancement contract, but these contractors are out doing work all year round. So they're doing the growing season work, they're doing the winter brush clearing, and then they're doing fire. So they really have buy-in. They really have understanding too of these properties. And again, those of us in the fire field as a burn boss, the more you know that site, the more comfortable you are as a burn boss, right? You know all the nooks and crannies, you know where the little trails are at or the trouble spots. So that's been a huge win for us with the contractors, is that in some cases they know some of these sites as well, if not better than we do, because they're actually spending more time boots on the ground out there now. And then that's the same crew that's out there burning that site come burn season. That has been a critical piece. And again, two things I forgot to mention a little bit earlier that were also key to us being successful is training. So that's a key thing. You mentioned the Chicago Wilderness Midwest Ecological Prescription Burn Training. That's sort of a copy of the NWCG's basic wildland firefighting 130, 190, but converted to burning in an urban area. And we require all of our folks to take that training. So even contractors have to comply with that. So that's key. The other key piece is building relationships with your local fire departments. And here in Cook County, we have 128 different municipalities. So that was a lot of relationship building on that journey, as I mentioned, from earlier on until now. And the vast majority of those folks are on board and understand what we're doing and support our work. And there's still some folks that aren't necessarily 100% behind us. But you got to keep working on that front.
Well, like you were talking about earlier, the educational gap that can exist kind of spans the range of, neighbors, folks that are stakeholders in that regard. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is local fire departments and those kind of things. So did you, over the last couple decades or so, what was that process looking like for you to start trying to bridge that that educational gap that exists? And were you doing it by yourself, or were you getting help, or what did that look like?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And it, like I said, like everything else we did, it was definitely some learning experience, right? Where you might knock on somebody's door, or in some cases, it was due to a situation or an incident that occurred, right? Maybe smoke got pushed across the road and the local fire department got a complaint. And then so they're reaching out to our organization to start asking questions. And we would go out of our way to meet with these folks, to try to get them out in the field to see what was going on in the ground. So the other critical piece for us on this end, at least here in Cook County, is the vast majority of these fire departments have no understanding, no training on wildland fire. And so the gap is even greater than some folks that may work with departments that respond regularly to wildland fire. So it was a variety of different ways and through different means. So the special event piece is key in that, where we would get people to come out and do things like a touch a truck, which is really easy to do, very inexpensive, 1 or 2 staff members, and you had all the fire equipment. So rather than doing a touch a truck around some of our like forestry equipment or some of our ecological restoration equipment, we specifically did it around fire. And that really helped make inroads with the parents when the kids were, playing with the equipment, squirting the backpacks, carrying a drip torch, all that kind of stuff that made for a great family photo for, a little weekend event that, of course, was free. That also helps as well. Engaging with the public at libraries. I didn't we did not turn down invites. If we got invited to present at a local library or a garden club or a village board meeting, we went, and in some cases we were deliberate. We would reach out to these folks to get on their agendas, which if you ever been to your local municipal board meeting or something, those meetings are usually pretty busy and the agendas are pretty packed already.
Yeah.
So it's not always easy, but you got to push and you got to get on there. Even that 15 minutes where you're talking to that community, most of them now are, on TV or recorded at least. So you have this public message getting out. It's work. There's no doubt about it. But so you have to look at all those different ways to engage with folks just to get the fire program out, the communication piece. And again, that's still got nothing to do with you actually being out on the ground. So there are things you could do then, right? Okay, so when you're out doing the firework, you want to make sure that you're communicating very well with the public. This goes back to that training piece. You want to make sure any staff you have out on that fire line or contractors, if the general public is asking what they're doing out there, right, you don't want them giving the old shoulder shrug, right? You want them to be able to give that elevator pitch. Here's why we're here. Because if you don't, those folks are going to instantly lose confidence in your program when you really haven't even done anything wrong. Okay. And when you're building a program, you can't afford to lose any ground because the actual fire piece, right, is enough of a stressor, on the system. And so those are key pieces. And then post-burn, like very inexpensively, we put up signs at sites, high traffic areas. This area was burned on purpose, or fire is good. And then a QR code that links to our webpage that talks about our burn program. So even just very simple things like that to be able to get messages out to the general public, we have seen the benefits of that very clearly.
I like that idea that you just mentioned about putting the signage out with the QR code, and this is why this happened. This wasn't a wildfire. This was a prescribed burn, and the QR code is something that 95% of people out there have the ability to look those things up pretty quickly. So kudos to you. That's a really great idea, and I'm sure it's been valuable to you. We definitely could benefit from something like that on our end. So you've talked about some of the major challenges and things that you guys have overcome to get to where you are today, and I'm just curious, do you see any other major challenges on the horizon that you need to try to overcome in the years ahead, aside from what we talked about?
I wish I could say no, but unfortunately, I have to say that there are other challenges. So first and foremost for us, and it'll always be a challenge, is the smoke management aspect of our fire program. That's never just going to go away. And if anything, it keeps getting worse. I think I made a point in the presentation I was doing on the Stevens Point platform that there's sites where, I burned 20 years ago where we at least had one side of the unit where we could push smoke. Well, now there's a, 12-story condo building there. And so development is still happening within Cook County. Buildings get knocked down, new things get built that then creates additional issues for us over and over again. And then just looking at the climate change piece, right? I mean, not only is our smoke management an issue, but is that going to become an issue with air quality stuff, right? Where if I'm out burning with 10 to 14 crews, that's anywhere from 10 to 14 burn units. And some of those crews may be doing 2 burn units that day, one earlier in the day, one later in the day. Am I going to have to meet some emission credit thing, right? Where I'm going to be limited in the amount of emissions that I could create, especially again, burning in such a heavily developed urban area. So these are all things that we're thinking about and we're worried about. And we're continually planning, especially on the smoke management piece, right? That's how do we get better on that? One of the bigger issues we have right now that we're dealing with is all the fallout from emerald ash borer moving through here, which was we started heavy removals in 2011 and finished that around 2015, 2016. We took down over 100,000 ash trees across our properties, 100,000. But we didn't take down anything that wasn't potentially going to negatively impact the general public or users of the preserve. So there's still a lot of ash trees that fell down in our woods now that are heavy fuels that are creating smoke issues for us, that we're doing fuel reduction. We're cutting, stacking, and burning as much as we can in the winter months at some of our higher priority burn sites to limit that. But that's not going away either, right? Because what's the next invasive species that's going to come along, right? We're dealing with spongy moth. We've got the spotted lanternfly that's coming through. We're dealing with sudden oak death. I mean, these things keep compounding themselves. And while they're an issue just even from the forestry side of our work, they contribute then to bigger issues down the road on the fire side. So it's just this domino effect that we've got to try to stay ahead of on a couple of fronts. So that's like one challenge, right? The smoke management piece. I mean, we're always going to have the issue of not just our program, but programs in the area, or even your program, Cully, to some degree, right? If there was a major incident, how is that going to impact my program and me being able to continue to do our work, right? So that's why, like in my role with the Illinois Prescribed Fire Council and some of the national stuff I've been involved in, we want everybody to be doing fire in a safe way, because it does impact everybody else's program. And so that's one of those things where, like, there really wouldn't be a whole lot I could do about it specifically, but it's something that we're thinking about all the time, which is why it's very important on the front end that you're doing everything you can to make sure your program is functioning the way that it should, that you're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. Funding, again, as I said, will always be an issue too. That's something that we'll have to stay on top of. Staffing, I mean, the market is changing finally on the employment side of things, and instead of when I post a position, I only have one or two candidates, I'm getting 8 to 10 now. So I'm seeing that turnaround, which has been very positive. Because again, we're going to have to keep doing it. Again, in this urban area, it's difficult to find people who really want to do conservation work. That's not typically the tie that we have, and so we're aggressive in recruiting to some of the schools in the area, even nearby states that have natural resources schools and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of those challenges out there that you don't get bored in this work, right? Just on the fire piece, let alone all the other work that we have to do in the conservation field.
I also want to point out those webinars are available on it's called the Prescribed Fire for Forest Management webinar series. So I want to make sure I reiterate that. And I believe that you were, to hear more details about your program and some of the things you guys are doing, it was on the June 5th, 2024 Prescribed Fire in Urban Landscapes. That was a really neat one. And there are several other individuals that were on that webinar too. And I found that to be a great tool, packed full of information. I still have a lot more that I want to go through there, but you guys are experiencing a lot of the same challenges we are, just kind of in a different shade. Obviously, we're in our particular area, we have a pretty big conservation focus in the natural area surrounding us, and we tend to get a pretty good amount of qualified applicants for our jobs, our positions, and everything. But we're in the same boat as you, and we talked about this last episode. It's like I feel like I'm in this fragile sort of glass house type thing, because if you can run a program for 20 years and everything goes along pretty well and you don't have any major incidents per se, knock on wood, you get a creep across the line maybe once or twice over the 20 years and have a little bit of a little bit of extra acreage burn unintentionally. But the minute that something major happens, something that is kind of at a heightened level, maybe a structure gets damaged or maybe a road gets smoked out, and I always feel like we're in one step away from having our program shut down. And I think it's good to be proactive, like what you had mentioned, getting the information out to the public and continually preaching this message of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So that in the event something like that does happen, you've you've been out there, you've explained to the public, you've built trust in the community, you've built that rapport, and you get the opportunity to explain, why things happen the way that they did. And Florida is pretty good about that. Florida Forest Service is a great entity. They do a lot of educational work, and we spend, there's some great websites that have been set up here. One of which is not only Florida, but beyond Florida, is called whyprescribefire.org. That's an interesting one that kind of gives folks who don't know much about fire, and even if you tune into this show and you're just sort of learning about this, that's a great place to go to get a basic overview of what it is we do and why we do it. So I salute you on on that work, because it sounds like, boy, it's been an uphill battle for decades on your end, and it's exciting to see the progress that you guys have made. And I did remember you mentioning this whole thing, and I've talked about this several times, about working around an airport and how do you handle that? Because I remember a while back, the first time I was ever burning around an airport, and I really got not worried, but it just kind of made me think a little bit. I had a column of smoke, on maybe a 10-acre burn, not very big burn, but I remember watching a passenger liner just go right through that column of smoke with all these people in that passenger liner. And it was just kind of one of those moments where, like, man, this kind of has me worried a little bit. This is a whole different ballgame than what I'm dealing with, working around an airport and having good communications on that front. So, can you talk a little bit more about your relationship with Chicago O'Hare and how that's developed over the years?
Yeah. Chicago O'Hare and then Midway are the two major airports, and then we also have a smaller one that's really adjacent to a property we burn regularly. I think it's called Chicago Executive now, up in the north suburbs. But the key to those relationships was, one, not causing them any trouble. We had a pretty large scale burn for us, a couple 100-acre warm season grass prairie back in 2006, March of 2006. And the smoke plume, where we were able to basically ring this entire unit. So we had just this giant smoke plume that went up, and it actually created a situation where planes coming into Midway had to be routed around our smoke plume. And so that was, again, this is 2024, so that's many years ago now. So this is an example of one of those sort of conversations that happen, and we learn from that. The airport, when we talked to them, because when we were making post-burn calls, with the fire department, the police, were like, you would not believe the phone calls we were getting from, Midway, because the pilots, of course, were calling this in and all this other kind of stuff. And so we have learned to address that through a couple of ways. Number one, better communication with those folks, right? So they know what's going on, especially, thinking about it after, 9/11 and those sort of scenarios where just the heightened sense of what the heck's going on here kind of scenario. The other piece is utilizing different ignition techniques. So we're not doing a burn where we're putting up 300 acres of smoke plume at one time. Okay. We're strip burning that site now. And so while it takes us a little bit longer, it eliminates that issue for us, impacting flight patterns at, some of the busiest airports in the United States. Right. So that to me is worth taking an extra 2 hours on that burn and maybe only getting one unit done that day with that crew versus having my program shut down because my boss gets a call from their boss who is screaming at him because the airport had an issue, So that's really how that developed. And the Chicago O'Hare sites that we burn, we were burning those pretty small units or in smaller pieces to begin with because we were so close to the airport there. This March of 2006 site is several miles away from Midway, but the planes were still low enough where they had to reroute things. But at O'Hare, we're so close. Like I joke on the presentation that the stewardess is telling me to snap my seatbelt on as she's flying over. those situations, we were like, I remember the first time burning there in the early 90s where it's like I was afraid, so we were moving so slow. A burn unit now that we would burn probably in like an hour and a half took us like 4 hours, just because we weren't that comfortable at that time. But we got there now. And so some of that just is learning. And I would say to people who maybe don't have folks that are as experienced as I am, or some of the other staff that works with me, talk to other people in the fire field, like we're doing here, right? You're listening to the experiences that I had. Learn from other people's, not so much their mistakes, but things that they did, and realize, hey, I could do this better. So don't let that be an excuse. That's for sure. So yeah, definitely burning around airports is one of those smoke sensitive targets that you want to be extremely careful about. Again, with us, along with schools, hospitals, nursing homes. Those are key things for us, not to mention, of course, all the roads around us, but yeah. And I want to just say, I agree 100% with you on the glass house scenario. And even in a state like Florida, that's very, very fire friendly, compared to a lot of other states, in the U.S. You still want to be careful.
Definitely. Well, we're as strong as our messaging and our trust that we built. I think is a lot of what it boils down to in the long term, anyway. And you've certainly gained a lot of that in your part of the country. It's really great to hear about. And the last thing I'll ask you on this subject. So, what can the world expect next from you and your program?
Well, I hope bigger and better things. I mean, I like to tell our team that, I talk to them too, because as I said, we have turnover on staff. This program wasn't what it was 10 years ago, right? It's where we're at now came from this long journey. So we got people coming on board that think that we've always operated this way. So I think it's really important that you're letting people know about all the work that went into building the program, so that they understand the responsibility, the weight of what it took to get here. That is critical. That trust piece you're talking about with the public, with the elected officials, it's also an internal issue, right? You have to build that trust with your staff. And I think one of the key things around that is that you really have to be honest, especially with the public and these elected officials, your fire departments. If something does go wrong, if you have that smoke go the wrong way or something happens, the bonus acres, you mentioned having a few extra acres that you weren't counting on. I mean, you got to be honest about those things. That helps with building trust, besides trying to come up with some excuses that really are not legitimate. So you got to be honest about all that. From our perspective, when I talk about bigger and better things, it's continuing to improve. You just can never let your guard down. So we tell our staff all the time, every day, this could be your last burn, from the standpoint of if something doesn't happen right. As much as we want to get fire on the ground, we want to get more acres burned, we want to get more good fire on the ground, we never want to be in a situation where you're pushing that envelope to the point of leading to mistakes. And so the biggest thing I caution people with that are in the infant stages of building a program is go slow. Take your time. That is the most critical piece. You want to make sure that, you can crawl before you can walk before you can run, and then be good at running before you take the marathon, And that's really what we've done. And we have to continue. We can't lose sight of everything, and then just continue to build on that. That's where we're going. And I mean, we know we're going to need to have fire to continue to manage the ecosystems here that are fire dependent moving forward.
Well, John, it's been a real pleasure hearing about your program, some of the great things that you guys are doing. And if folks want to learn more about Cook County and the work that you're doing, how can they find your website?
Easy to get to our website. It's fpdcc.com. That's all you got to do. And then, go in the search bar, put in prescribed fire or whatever you need. I'm happy for folks to reach out directly to me. I'm not sure how you would typically handle that, but however that happens, I'm happy to talk to folks about our program.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And if you guys want to get a hold of John, you can always. I think that you guys have a main, like an administrative phone number that you can call, and they can route them to you, right?
Yep, and we have a contact us. When you get on our website, and you can just submit something through there, and it'll get to me. That's for sure.
Thank you again for your time and energy on this. And as always, we appreciate you taking us in another step beyond the fire.
Thank you.